Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Narcissism Decoder. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Mazzella. I'm really excited to share something special with you today. I recently had the opportunity to be a guest on Dimming the Gaslight, an incredible podcast that delves deep into the realities of narcissistic abuse and recovery. Mac and Phil, the host, invited me on to discuss vulnerable narcissism, and our conversation was so rich, engaging, and insightful that we ended up talking for over an hour. Phil had listened to some of the earlier episodes on vulnerable narcissism and came with some important questions. We explored topics like the dynamics of codependency and narcissism, what really drives the behavior of a vulnerable narcissist, and whether real change is possible. We also tackled the role of pain as a motivator for transformation and change, and the complexity of apologies, forgiveness, and the cycle of resentment and revenge. Mac and Phil were kind enough to let me share this conversation with you here on the Narcissism Decoder, and I think you're going to find it both thought-provoking and practical. So let's dive in. Here's part one of my conversation with the host of Dimming the Gaslight. I hope you find it interesting, entertaining, and as thought-provoking as I did.
All right, everybody, welcome back into a brand new episode of Dimming the Gaslight. My name is Mac.
And I'm Phil.
And welcome into the newest episode. So Phil's going to do the intro today. Phil, take it away. I think this is a pretty cool episode we're about to do.
Yeah, so a few months back, I was actually approached, and I didn't even realize it, from my old podcast, that I used to run. And I kind of periodically will go back into that. And I guess it's been a very long period of time that I haven't really looked through a lot of my emails. And I found an email from Dr. Anthony Mazzella, who runs his own podcast about narcissism called the Narcissism Decoder, discussing about, potentially being a guest or, on each other's channel. I thought for sure, I might as well try to reach out and see if he would be interested in coming on Dimming the Gaslight instead. But sometimes when you go for months, it's, I don't know if people are going to notice it or if they're even going to care anymore if the moment's passed, So luckily I was able to touch base with them. We were able to speak on the phone. I kind of went down a little bit of a rabbit hole listening to his podcast, which is really good, which I would absolutely recommend to everyone here, especially if you're looking for more psychology-based approach to the web of narcissism. But either way, he's here. He finally made it. I'm really, really excited to introduce this episode to you guys. Welcome to the show, Dr. Mazzella.
Well, great. Thanks so much, Mac and Phil, for having me. I did a little bit of a deep dive myself, and I've been listening to your content and equally as impressed. So I'm really excited to have this chat with the two of you today. I'm looking forward to it. So thanks again.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you for listening.
So one of the things that I think that we really I would like to discuss is, as Max said, is the forgotten narcissist. Is we've kind of, I don't think that's a phrase. I think it's just something that Max said, and I feel like I've said it to him too. I don't know. It seems like a phrase we should coin: the vulnerable narcissist. I don't think
forgotten version of narcissism. The forgotten version of narcissism.
Yeah, you talked overt, covert, malignant, things like that. Where's vulnerable ever fit in on our podcast? It hasn't, right?
No, I've never even heard the word. And so we started talking about Dr. Anthony Mazzella.
That's so interesting. That's so interesting because there's this, I guess the way that I think about it is narcissism exists on a spectrum, right? So all these different traits that you just mentioned, Phil, like the covert, even the malignant, the grandiose type of narcissist.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing they all have in common is that they all have these narcissistic characteristics. So it's not like typically if you pay close enough attention, you don't meet just one type of narcissist. Right. I'll just give you an example. So how do we even think about the vulnerable narcissist? It's that kind of person who then, suddenly becomes, or not even suddenly, but presents as more needy, clinging, demanding, complaining, pouting, whining. I could keep going, but I think you get the picture of this type of person. So instead of them being like overtly grandiose, like what we typically talk about, they tend to present as more overtly like needy and clingy and helpless. So we
Almost overly emotional.
yes.
They really lean into that emotionality, or probably even claim things along the lines of talking about how empathetic they are.
Mhm.
I'm an empath. I just feel so much,
Yes.
It's interesting.
I have a question that just came to my mind real quick. Could this possibly be when codependency turns toxic? Like
Yeah, go ahead.
when codependency turns toxic. And what I mean by that is a person who, like wants to come off meek and needs constant help. And then it becomes sort of a manipulative trait in order to get the supply that they're looking for.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I guess what I wonder, as soon as I heard your question, I was thinking, is codependency ever not toxic? That was like sort of what went through my mind. I mean,
Sure. Yeah, that's fair.
yeah. And
Maybe what I mean by toxic is malicious. When codependency turns malicious, maybe.
okay. Oh, good. So this is a good opportunity for me to share something that I think could be a little surprising to the two of you. But
Yeah.
I mean, this could be my own limitation in the way that I think about narcissism. But I don't really even though their behavior is manipulative, like you said, Mac, I don't think, for me at least, it's helpful usually to like define it that way. What I typically try to think is like, what is it that they're doing? What is it they're trying to get? Or what's missing that they're trying to get at this point in their life? Or even what just happened in this moment? Because we were just together having a good time, or maybe the relationship was at a point where things seemingly are going well. And then it feels like suddenly something has changed. I would just be more curious about, I wonder what just happened here now that I'm seeing a different side of their personality, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does.
Definitely makes sense.
Yeah.
What is that switch that makes it flip?
That was a great question, because oftentimes what you hear in the social media is just like one moment they're idealizing you, and then the next moment they're devaluing you, right? And my idea is to always try to show people they don't just wake up one morning and they decide to devalue you. Something happens. So in the case that we're talking about with the vulnerable narcissist, they don't just become more clingy and needy or desperate. Something happens. Can I just give a quick example of this, just from social media?
Of course.
From television, basically. So we're not looking at any case. A lot of people are familiar with a famous TV series, like it's called The Sopranos, right? With Tony Soprano.
God.
Yeah, you know it. Okay,
One of my all-time favorites. I'm a Jersey boy born and raised.
this is great. So you're going to remember this quite specifically. So Tony presents more as that grandiose narcissist, right? With, we could say, more like the malignant type because of his criminal behavior. But not even an episode. There are a series of episodes where he and his wife separate. I don't know if you remember this, Mac. And do you remember where he goes to live when they separate? This is so interesting. He goes to live back at his mother's home, which is in essence. I should have given you another second.
I always hated his mother. Oh God, is that where you're going with this? The mother is a vulnerable narcissist?
No,
The mother was torture. Mother's torture.
Well, she is. She's more like more malignant and maybe even covert. But what I was using this illustration because, no coincidence, it's interesting. Tony returns to mommy's home, right? Which is more like the vulnerable narcissist who become very dependent on somebody taking care of them. And then this is really specific. This is the nuanced stuff that I look at. If you remember when he's living back at home, he can't get off the phone at night. So it's late at night and he suddenly becomes very desperate and clingy, trying to keep, I don't remember who it was, but people would talk to him at night and he didn't want to get off the phone with them. He became like a bit of a puddle. And I have other examples like this. One is from Breaking Bad, but we don't need to keep going. But I just wanted to put that image in your mind. And for your audience, this is really nicely what captures the vulnerable narcissist.
Yeah. There's so many thoughts racing through my head right now. And with that, I know I feel like people are probably sick of me talking about it, but I feel like they that could lead to other issues, right? Lead to other physical issues, even with a vulnerable narcissist, somebody that's like almost like constantly worried, or at least giving the appearance of constantly being worried and needing attention. It's a supply thing in a way, I feel like, right?
Mhm.
Just a constant need for a source of supply. But then I feel like there might even be different dynamics when it comes to the way they argue with their partner or their spouse or their child, to where it's almost an arguing just for the supply and not wanting the argument to end. And like you were saying, with calling late at night, maybe even keeping the arguments going into the early hours of morning just to have the attention and, maybe screw up somebody else's stake. Yeah, the supply, which also feeds into the idea that a lot of people on this narcissistic spectrum like to keep their partner awake or disrupt their sleep,
Is there any evidence to that?
I like that you started with supply, like using the word supply. Right. And I appreciate, and then Mac, you jumped right on with this, that you switched it to what? Attention, right? And I think that's a critical point, because supply is kind of vague. Remember I said I love nuances and getting really close to things? Because if we don't really understand what they're looking for, how could we ever really, if this is what we want to be, if we decide to be in a relationship with somebody like this, how could we ever really be helpful and shift the relationship so that this doesn't just continue to repeat itself, unless we could be very clear in our mind, what exactly are they looking for? And then how do we give them that kind of attention that they need? Because I think, Phil, staying on the phone late at night with them, that stuff doesn't work, right?
No.
It's not really going to fill them up in the way that they need. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I guess a segue into what you just said there too, that made me think also is, what are your feelings on, like you said, how are we supposed to figure out what they need type thing in a way? I don't think that was your exact wording, but what do you think about, especially like, I guess any narcissist, but even sticking with this vulnerable narcissist, do you think it is possible for either change, or from a psychological standpoint, do you think it's possible for them to change? And then secondary part of that question would be, do you think it's possible to be happy staying in a relationship with someone who's a vulnerable narcissist?
For the first part, is it possible to change? That's really, again, another complicated question, right?
Very.
And in part, it depends, right? Because it depends on a couple of things. One is their level of motivation to change, right?
Right.
Are they genuinely interested in change? Like, do they get to that point where they hit rock bottom, where they realize, then that vulnerability starts to come up and they don't feel good, they're having panic attacks or whatever may be happening, that they then need to change. Now, I'm a little biased because I'm in this field. This is what I do all day, and I do see people change. I had a consultation just last week, coincidentally, of a couple, because a lot of couples come to me after infidelity or something happens. And at the end of the consultation, the fellow was like, I'm sick of this. I'm sick of her behavior. I'm sick of the way she treats me, and I'm not interested in changing. She needs to change. So somebody like that, very unlikely they're going to change. We'll see. Like, I planted a few seeds over the course of the consultation to really clearly demonstrate how he participates in this fantasy that the two of them had going for many years. Sometimes when you can hook their interest like that, Phil, that's what motivates them more to change, because you could say something or talk to them in a way that they've never been spoken to before, and something about that sort of sparks their curiosity, or they feel good. They like that. They feel what we call validated, which is very unusual, because usually they're upsetting people and then people are yelling at them or devaluing them back. So that's a long answer to your question, but the short answer is yes, absolutely. These people can change. There's no doubt, if they're interested and motivated and do the work to change. Yeah.
There's just a very large word there that is if. If, in big, bold letters.
Let me ask you this. Is pain the great motivator? Is that the great catalyst for change? Is uncomfortability and pain?
Yes, no doubt, because pain brings them back into the real world. See, that's reality. In reality, we all experience pain and discomfort, but we learn how to tolerate that. Don't worry, I won't go down that rabbit hole, but yes. So Mac, if and when they experience enough discomfort and they recognize that this is a pattern, like I mentioned with Tony, like the panic attacks, he went into therapy, right? Unfortunately, he didn't get the best therapy. But that's where then, yes, there's the potential for change. Your wife says, I'm leaving you. I'm sick of these affairs that you're having, or you don't really ever pay attention to me. Or because there's so much content out there now, people are becoming more aware of these narcissistic traits. And they're like, wow, my spouse is or my mother is. And then they confront them on that and they demand change. And then, yes, that's very painful. And if they don't want to lose that relationship, that could be one of the motivators for change. Absolutely.
But with any narcissist we see, right? Like, let's keep on the Tony Soprano example, right? He's going to say, well, Carmela did this and she did that and blah, 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 blah. Are they still absent of the same accountability as any other narcissist?
Yeah. Okay. This is a great point. And this is why a therapeutic process becomes so important. And it's so different than reading a self-help book on this stuff or taking a course on it. Because in therapy, we go through a process where we start exactly there, Mac, right? You have to start where they are and appreciate their subjective experience. And that's why this stuff takes time, because you can't puncture that too quickly. But yes, absolutely, you have to start to make inroads into that, deflecting and blaming and always accusing somebody else where they have then no responsibility for the fight. But you can't come right out and say, hey, look, did you notice the way that you treated her when she blew up on you? Because then they would feel ganged up on. Like, oh, you're doing it too now. And then they're not going to come back.
That's the most frustrating part of narcissism.
Tell me, what? Wait, part, the blaming?
Just that the blaming and lack of accountability. To me, anyway.
I think the fighting in circles and just like because of the blaming, the blame shifting, there's always an out. Like when instead of taking ownership for something, there's always a way to find one little word or one little thought, or just shift the conversation completely away from the main point, right? So here's the straight line, and then it's just branching into word salad. And then by the end of the argument, you think you made so many solid points, and then you're just going, what the hell just happened?
See, remember the conversation you and I had offline last night? Like, we could talk about this right now. Remember the conversation you and I had offline last night? Is like, it gets to a point where like they just want to, like, say the person who's not a narcissist lied. Let's just say they lied as an example, okay? And it was maybe a white lie to sort of self-preservation white lie, okay? The narcissist, even though the person will show remorse for lying, they will continue to drag that person through the mud, even when that person has genuine remorse. And they might say, hey, I'm sorry. Yeah, but you lied. Yeah, but you lied. Yeah, but you lied.
Yeah, and it gets owning it. And then they're still like,
you're owning it, but you lied. And then it gets to a point where it's not about coming to a common ground.
Right.
It's about winning.
Yeah.
Okay, wait. Okay, this is great. So let me jump right in the middle, because I have no idea what the two of you were talking about. So I'm just going to speak to it from my perspective. And
I think you do know what we're talking about.
Okay, and hopefully in doing this, I don't insult anybody when I do this, okay? So
Sure.
Remember a couple of times I said, like, the devil's in the details. Like, you have to get into nuances of these things. So, Mac, if you and Phil, let's just make believe we're a hypothetical couple coming into my office, like in this kind of situation, what I would want to get closer to in this example is, and believe me, there's even this little vignette that you just gave, Mac, there is so much that we can unpack. This would be a full session, okay? But the first thing that comes to my mind is, when you apologized, how specifically did you do it? I want the exact words, and then I want the response, because this is a little complicated, but when one apologizes for having wronged somebody, typically that's meaningless, believe it or not. And now the two of you are like, what the hell are you talking about? That's an apology. But I could tell you, like, apologies for many people, not everybody, but they're easy to give. Like, it's easy to apologize. But to fully repair after you've created some damage, like the lie that you mentioned, is very different than apologizing. So I had someone on my show a couple weeks ago, and he was talking about the word repenting. And we define it a little differently in psychoanalytic theory. But basically what he was getting at was repairing the damage. And one way to repair the damage is not just apologizing, but validating something as well, which takes a deeper level of empathy. So that means the apology will look something like this, just to be very specific. like let's say you did lie, Mac, about something, is to recognize that you lied and that you hurt them. And you could imagine that your lie, that they must have felt hurt or betrayed or very confused, and you would never want them to feel that way. And that's why you need to really figure out a way now, Mac, right? If you were, I don't know if Phil lied or who lied in this example, okay? But to make sure that that doesn't happen again.
Definitely Mac.
Right?
It's
It
definitely
was Mac, right? I have going.
that. I think those are all valid points, right? And I think that that's normal healing in relationship. So when you are dealing with people that are logical individuals and they can see like where the disconnect was, and it's okay, so now I understand your intentions. Thank you for apologizing with intent and not just saying I'm sorry to say I'm sorry. You know, a normal person's response to that apology would be like, hey, I hear you. Thank you so much. Let's take action on this and not let this happen again. And water under the bridge. Thank you for letting me know your intentions. But what happens when you do genuinely apologize in that way and you say, hey, I understand how this made you feel. This was my intention. It was a mistake. I clearly see that now. I'm going to be a lot better at keeping you more informed going forward. I don't want to make you feel this way. I never want to make you feel this way. And I'm sorry that my actions were the cause of this pain, right? And you genuinely mean it. But yet every time some little variable happens, it gets pulled back to that, you know, and what we like to say is drag through the mud, you know, so the other person says, but remember when you lied to me, I'm still not over that, you know, and it's just kind of like, it gets to a point to where it's like, hey, why did you lie about that? Why did you lie about that? It's like, we've already talked about this and I genuinely meant my apology. Well, I'm still hurt. And I feel like that's kind of the vulnerable narcissist that like would continue to pull you back in and drag you through the mud, even if it is a genuine apology. You know, it's where I feel two healthy individuals could connect, move forward for the sake of their relationship.
Okay,
you know?
I got it. Yeah,
I feel like it's like capitalizing on somebody else's remorse.
Right. In a way, yeah. That's kind of how I feel. Right.
the two of you have discussed this already. So I'm just curious, before I jump in with my response, how did you work this out? Like, did you come to some sort of path forward when something like this happens? Or is it just like, ooh, this is a complicated one. Let's kick this one over to Dr. Mazzella.
I don't feel like there's ever any resolution. I feel like it's just like an ever-ending cycle.
Okay.
You know, you basically just ignore it, right? Like eventually.
No, you can't. You can't ignore it.
No.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, it's like essentially, it's like you fight so much, or you argue over the same topic so much that to the point of exhaustion, potential nervous breakdown. You wake up and you pretend like everything's fine. Like I feel like that's kind of what happens with this type of personality. You know, like a vulnerable narcissist until they want that attention again, or they need something, or like you were talking about that shift in energy, right? Towards like everything's fine, and then there's this shift in energy. What causes that? I don't know. But then when that shift of energy happens, but you lied to me.
They want to burn the house down. Yeah, they want to burn the house down.
Yeah. So it's like, wait, I thought we resolved this 2 days ago, you know? And here it is again.
And Dr. Mazzella, just so you understand, I think you were about to ask me, like, you know, because yes, we have talked about this offline. We're using examples of stories we've heard. We're just using examples of stories we've heard.
Okay. So
Frustrating stories we've heard.
yes, this is very frustrating, by the way. This is kind of like, because you're just banging your head against the wall at this point.
Right.
And I want to give this caveat before I respond to it, Phil, is this is my response to this really tricky dilemma that you're describing today, okay? Because it's so complicated. There are many ways to think about it. So I'm just going to share with you one way to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
So one way would be, I'm picturing, as you're describing it, Phil, again, I don't know why I keep doing this, but it's like you and Mac are my couple, you know, like in the office. And I'm trying to think, how can I help the two of you move beyond this, right? This is an
You know what's funny? Nothing could be further from the truth, because Bill and I have never had a disagreement in 3 years. Like we are two, like we really are. But we've never had a disagreement about anything. Sure, use us as an example.
Okay, so where my mind goes immediately, Phil, with this one is, so let me give a little theory, just a little tiny bit, so I don't bore you and your listeners, but having a theory about what's happening is always important in terms of intervention. So my theory then becomes, yes, if the apology is completely appropriate, you're making amends, you're validating her emotions, and you're being patient, because if it's an affair, let's say, just for an example, that stuff takes time to get over. And if you're still within a reasonable time frame where, of course, she's still going to be upset and she's going to need to talk about it. But typically, just so you know, when one talks about something that's hurt them, if in fact they really do feel validated, almost immediately, that helps move them to a more regulated state of mind. So it's not just complaining over and over and over what you did to hurt them. So the first thing is I want to hear is, are you helping this person move to a more regulated state of mind? Now, let's say you are, for argument's sake, and they continue to perseverate on this, right?
Right.
So now the question is, what's going on here? What are you doing? So the underlying theory is what we call object representation. So in other words, she has a specific representation of you in mind that she needs to be true. So her representation of you is of the malignant type, or the type who betrays, the type that she can't trust, the type, etc. Oh, and just a really quick digression. Not that this is very important, but this is more of what we call the covert narcissist. You see, the vulnerable narcissist is more of that needy, clingy type, and they're not typically this aggressive. They may have these thoughts, but they don't act them out or go after you in this way because they're so dependent on you and getting that attention, the mode of repair, what they need, right? That's the supplies, the word you mentioned earlier. So this is more like the covert type. And in the covert type, what you're describing is someone who's holding on to resentment. And then that then becomes the work, Phil. That's what we need to start to work on, is how important it is and the reason why they need to hold on to this representation of you as this type of person and all of what that means to them and how they are now getting revenge, because that's what you're describing. This isn't a productive conversation. This is an act of revenge, right? That they're trying to make you suffer. So that then becomes what we call grist for the mill. In other words, that's where we want to work, if that makes sense. I don't know, it sort of resonates with you when I say it that way. Does that make a little sense?
Everything. Everything is resonating with me.
Disclaimer alert. The Narcissism Decoder podcast is provided for general information purposes only. The content presented in this podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any psychological condition related to narcissism. The content on this podcast should not be considered a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. For specific advice pertaining to narcissism or any other psychological condition, you could reach me directly. I am an experienced mental health practitioner who is always taking on new patients. If you would just like a consultation, I can do that too.